exotic plants. Durazzo included Baroque elements. The throne room, auditorium and ballroom remain unchanged. Opposite, on the slope side of the street, the Jesuits built a monastery in 1623. In 1775, it became the University of Genoa. The Annunziata Church was built in Classicism times. The interior features a shining golden vault that is located high upon pillars with Corinthian capitals. As the city stretched from the sea to the slopes beyond, it was necessary to build sloping railway tracks and elevators. These ingenious devices helped the residents in their daily lives. The views to the harbour and town are breathtaking. No wonder there are so many private residences here. Traveling here is fun. Close to Via San Luca is the Palazzo Spinola, former residence to the noble Spinola family. It has many original features. Today, it is the Galleria Nazionale, featuring the works of international masters and also prominent Genoese artists. The Via Garibaldi was originally planned to be a grand boulevard. The Palazzo Bianco was the first of several palaces which were built here during the Renaissance. It was built for Luca Grimaldi and then handed down to several descendants of the same family, and finally as a generous donation to the city. In the 18th century, fine embellishments and decorations were added to the original palace, turning it into a Baroque gem. As new owners, the city fathers also added further features and transformed the palace into a pinacothek. Due to its red facade of the Brignoli Sale family, it is called the Palazzo Rosso. Built in the 17th century, it was the last built magnificent building of the area and is considered to be Genoa's most beautiful palace. However, this heritage to the city is more than exceptional, since everything is original: the frescoes, the furniture, and the works of art. Baroque ceiling frescoes have been transformed into masterpieces. And the family's art collection includes portraits and works of the great masters. Niccolo Grimaldi had the Palazzo Terzi built in the middle of the 16th century. but soon afterwards Giovanni Andrea Doria acquired it for his son. Here too are paintings and works of art, and since 1848 the city mayor has resided here. The original violin and sheet music of Genoese master violinist Niccolo Paganini are exhibited here, and allegedly an urn that contains the ashes of Christopher Columbus. The Teatro Carlo Felici, the new stock exchange, the Palazzo Ducale, and other magnificent buildings frame the Piazza de' Ferrari, central point of the city. Genoese sailor Christopher Columbus inhabited this small building between 1455 and 1470. His father, Domenico, was guardian of the nearby town gate, a structure that was rebuilt several times. Adjacent are the remains of the Sant'Andrea Benedictine Monastery, a 12th century cloister. And on a small hill is the city's main gate, the Porta Soprana, a massive defensive structure that has survived the ravages of time. Dating back to the 12th century, the Romanesque Santa Maria de Castello Basilica has frequently been rebuilt and extended. Particularly when the church passed into the possession of the Dominicans in 1442, which attracted generous donations from wealthy Genoese families. Sections of the monastery complex were redesigned and several cloisters created. The inner courtyards became beautiful gardens. The altars, nave and dome revealed their splendor even when dimly lit. Directly behind the Piazza de' Ferrari is the Chiesa del Gesù Jesuit Church. A Baroque building with subdivided vaults, central dome and huge paintings throughout. The upper section was completed in 1892 and was based on a drawing by Rubens in 1622. The church is a shrine to various masterpieces of great artists, such as Peter Paul Rubens, Guido Reni, and Giovanni Battista Carlone. The origins of the Doge Palace date back to 1298, when Genoa's power extended to the Mediterranean. Here resided the Doges, and later the tower was used as a prison. In the bel etage next to the Doge's apartments is a chapel whose frescoes glorify the political and economic fortunes of the city. Genoa Cathedral is consecrated to San Lorenzo and was completed in the 11th century. Typical of Genoa with its black and white facade. Within its sumptuous interior, multi-story arc walls divide high naves. A giant rose window and a painting of the Last Supper are just two of the cathedral's great works of art. Altars and chapels were added later, as was the John's Chapel, in which the ashes of the Baptist were preserved. Of particular note is the treasury chamber and its golden shrines. Including a glass bowl from the Last Supper. The Piazza San Matteo is one of the most important squares of the old town, which was transformed by the Doria family into their private quarters. Each family member was given a magnificent palazzo, and they were, so to speak, in privacy. This included a family church with crypt and grave. The small church is an original Gothic cloister. The atmosphere is remarkable and takes one back to those historic bygone times. At the small Piazza Banchi, close to the port, moneylenders settled. Their church of the same name was erected in the 16th century to commemorate the end of an epidemic. The dome was decorated with the history of the Passion of Christ, which was created by Marcello Spazzo and Stefano Storace in precious stucco work in 1603. Privately owned narrow-gauge Trenino Railway offers a journey from Genoa through Green Hills to Casella. Inaugurated in 1929, it provided welcome transport for the inhabitants of the mountain villages. Through narrow curves and tunnels and across many bridges, the train winds its way to the small town of Casella. Back in Genoa, the famous Staglieno Cemetery is located near the station. It's also tantamount to being an open-air museum of sculpture. The splendor and vibrancy of the memorials is unique, a glorious necropolis. Genoa is portrayed in the cemetery as a cosmopolitan port city, in which all religions are accepted in death. The lift travels to the former Monte Galeto Fortress Hill and the Castello d'Albertis. It is the noble domicile of seafarer and explorer Enrico Alberto d'Albitis. From here, he enjoyed the view of the harbor and city and surrounded himself with his travel memorabilia. The capital of the Liguria region has always been the gateway to the world, a medieval naval power made rich by maritime trade. Genoa, dominator of the seas, is a metropolis in transition, a city that appeals to all of the senses.
Around 7 kilometers west of Lasa's city center, it's common to see hordes of sightseers, as this area contains an extraordinary building. Many Tibetans also use the surrounding 360,000 square meter park to picnic. Beyond the white outer wall is what everyone has come to see, the former summer residence of the Dalai Lama. The most inner part of the private residence is hidden behind a yellow wall. The entrance gates are usually locked. The Norbuling Ka, or Jeweled Garden, was abandoned in 1959 when the last Dalai Lama made his escape to exile. The occupation and annexation of Tibet by China forced its spiritual and political leader to leave his homeland in the Himalayas. There was once a willow grove here before a representative of the Chinese emperor of the Qing dynasty ordered the construction of a palace for the 7th Dalai Lama. It was later enlarged and named Norbuling Ka. The picturesque pathway into the residence leads through the bamboo garden. After a few paces, there is the earliest building of the entire complex, the palace of the present 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso. The roof of the new summer palace, that was completed in 1956, is decorated with a striking Buddhist symbol, the sun wheel. The swastika, as the sun wheel is also called, is one of 8 symbols of Buddhism that are said to bring good fortune. It's also the symbol of eternity. In excellent condition, the new summer palace of the Dalai Lama is considered to be the most important building in the Norbulingka. Due to the Dalai Lama's exile, the palace is of great symbolic significance for the Tibetan people who have struggled for their independence since occupation by the Chinese. It was built during the reign of the 7th Dalai Lama, but it was the 8th Dalai Lama who was the first to live here. This 18th century pavilion blends harmoniously into the landscape of the park and creates a wonderful atmosphere. Over the years, the large Norbulingka area had further buildings added during the reign of numerous Tibetan monarchs. Adding to the splendid buildings and gardens of his predecessor, the 8th Dalai Lama further enhanced the grounds with beautiful pavilions and glorious scenic splendor. The most outstanding building that dates back to the 8th Dalai Lama is without doubt the Tuzin Palace, set in an idyllic location. Due to the remarkable reputation of the 8th Dalai Lama, he became an important political figure during the second half of the 18th century. Jamphal Gyatso was the family name of the 8th Dalai Lama, who became an intermediary for the British as well as for the Emperor of China. In the meeting hall of the old summer palace, the god king welcomed important visitors and led many Buddhist ceremonies. The main entrance is decorated with several lion figures that highlight the majestic character of the building. The Street of Lions demonstrates the worldly and political influence that the 8th Dalai Lama enjoyed at the end of the 18th century. The palace complex was gradually extended due to the cutting down of surrounding forests. Daran Migyo was the 7th Dalai Lama's first palace. The small complex is in excellent condition. When the 7th Dalai Lama, Khalsang Gyatso, bathed at a spring on what is today's park, this spot seemed to him to be the perfect location for a summer palace. However, today even beautiful flowers cannot disguise the sad history of this beautifully located summer residence. The palace was built in 1754. In the summer months, it was inhabited by the god king. For the inhabitants of Lhasa, the splendid parade from the Potala to the Norbulingka on the 18th day of the third moon month was a popular spectacle. On the western edge of the Norbulingka Park is a building that dates back to the 20th century, the palace of the 13th Dalai Lama. The Jiansel Potrang once contained a precious collection of ancient tankas, the colourful banners of Tantric Buddhism. The rule of the 13th Dalai Lama, Tubten Gyatso, was far from peaceful as it was dominated by foreign hostilities. The God King gained much respect in the political world and thus brought about many reforms during his rule. But there was one thing he couldn't achieve. Although he brought independence to Tibet in 1912, it was not given international acclaim. The jeweled garden of Nobulinkar well deserves its name. Indeed, the summer residence of the Dalai Lama and its spacious parks are historic and much-loved treasures of a bygone time. Around 50 kilometers from the Jordanian city of Aqaba is one of the most fascinating desert landscapes in the world, the Wadi Rum. Despite its desolate terrain and hostile environment, the Wadi Rum region was first inhabited several thousand years ago. The unique landscape of this desert valley is the result of numerous processes of erosion that have gradually created its fascinating scenery. The beauty of these mountains has inspired several authors, the most famous of whom was Englishman T. Lawrence. At the beginning of the 20th century, Lawrence of Arabia, as he became known, visited the Wadi Rum on several occasions. It's no coincidence that one of the Wadi Rum's magnificent rock formations bears the same name as that given by Lawrence to his famous autobiography, The Seven Pillars.